The Argos Anomaly. The alarms were a slow, creeping dread, not the sharp, urgent blare of a hull breach, but a low, guttural groan that vibrated through the metal bones of the Argos 7. Dr. Aris Thorne, his thin frame clad in the regulation blue jumpsuit, frowned at the flickering console. He was a xenobiologist, not an engineer, but even he could tell the readings were wrong. The ship's internal sensors were reporting anomalies. "Captain," he said, his voice tight, "I'm getting some strange readings in Sector 4. Temperature fluctuations, erratic energy spikes. Nothing catastrophic, but unusual." Captain Eva Rostova, a woman whose face was etched with the lines of countless deep space voyages, didn't immediately respond. She stared out the viewport at the inky blackness punctuated by the distant, cold pinpricks of stars. The Argos 7 was a deep space research vessel, far from the well-trodden trade routes, exploring a newly discovered nebula. They were alone. "Unusual how, Aris?" she finally asked, her voice calm, but with an underlying edge. "Unusual as in impossible," Aris replied, his fingers flying across the console. "The temperature fluctuations are happening in a vacuum, and the energy readings, they're not consistent with any known physics." A sudden, sharp clang echoed through the ship. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the bridge into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency lighting and the console screens. "What was that?" Rostova demanded, her hand instinctively reaching for the emergency comms. "I don't know," Aris said, his voice strained, "but whatever it is, it's getting closer." The emergency comms sputtered to life, a static-filled voice crackling through the speakers. "Engineering to bridge. We've lost power to the main reactor. Something's draining it. Fast!" The lights flickered back on, revealing a scene of growing panic. The crew, usually so composed, moved with a frantic urgency. The groaning sound from the alarms intensified, becoming a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Rostova, her face grim, ordered a full diagnostic of the ship. The results were chilling. The sensors were reporting a rapidly expanding anomaly originating from Sector 4, the same sector where Aris had detected the initial readings. It was a dark spot, a void in the ship's internal scans, growing larger with each passing second. "It's like something's eating the ship from the inside," Aris whispered, his eyes wide with horror. They sealed off Sector 4, hoping to contain whatever was happening. But the anomaly was relentless. It spread through the ship's ventilation system, through the conduits, through the very metal of the hull. The groaning pulse grew louder, resonating with a terrifying intensity. Crew members started to disappear. Not with a bang or a scream, but with a silent, unsettling fade. One moment they were there, the next, they were gone, as if erased from existence. The security cameras showed nothing, just a flicker, a momentary distortion, and then emptiness. Panic gripped the ship. The remaining crew, their faces pale and drawn, huddled together in the bridge, their eyes darting nervously around the room. The air grew thick with a sense of dread, a suffocating presence that pressed down on them, stealing their breath. Aris, his mind racing, tried to make sense of the impossible. He had studied countless alien life forms, but nothing could explain what was happening. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling, being consumed by an unseen predator. Then he saw it. A flicker in the corner of his eye, a subtle distortion in the air. It was a shadow, a fleeting glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. It was dark, impossibly dark, a void within a void, and it was moving. He pointed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "There, I saw it." Rostova, her eyes narrowed, followed his gaze. She saw nothing, but she trusted Aris. He wasn't prone to hysteria. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I don't know," Aris stammered. "But it's feeding on the ship's energy, on everything." The groaning pulse intensified, reaching a crescendo that made their teeth ache. The lights flickered again, then died, plunging the bridge into absolute darkness. The emergency lighting flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls. Then, the screams started. Not the panicked cries of fear, but a drawn-out, agonizing wail, a sound that seemed to tear through the very air. One by one, the remaining crew members vanished, swallowed by the darkness. Aris and Rostova were left alone, huddled together in the darkness, the screams echoing in their ears. They could feel the presence, the dark, hungry thing that was consuming the ship. It was close. So close. "We have to get to the escape pods," Rostova whispered, her voice trembling. They stumbled through the darkened corridors, their hands outstretched, feeling their way through the suffocating darkness. The groaning pulse was deafening now, a relentless rhythm that pounded in their skulls. They reached the escape pod bay, only to find it in ruins. The pods were mangled, their hatches ripped open, their interiors empty. "No!" Rostova gasped, her voice choked with despair. The dark presence was upon them now. They could feel it, a cold, empty void that pressed against their skin, stealing their warmth. Aris saw it again, the fleeting glimpse of darkness, a shadow that moved without form. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched it. The darkness recoiled, a momentary flicker of surprise. Then it surged forward, engulfing him. He felt a cold, empty sensation, a tearing, a dissolution of his very being. His thoughts scattered, his memories faded, his consciousness dissolved into nothingness. Rostova watched in horror as Aris vanished, swallowed by the darkness. She was alone, utterly alone, in the vast, empty darkness of space, with a predator that defied all understanding. She knew she was next. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. The groaning pulse reached its peak, then silence. The Argos 7 drifted through the nebula, a ghost ship, a husk of metal and wires, its crew erased from existence. The dark anomaly, whatever it was, had consumed everything, leaving behind only an empty void. And in the vast, silent darkness of space, it waited, hungry for its next meal. The silence after Aris's disappearance was more terrifying than any scream. Rostova, her breath ragged, pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the escape pod bay. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive stillness. The darkness, no longer just a lack of light, felt like a tangible presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on her. She knew she couldn't stay there. The thing, whatever it was toying with her, savoring the fear. She had to move, had to try to find some way, any way, to fight back. She forced herself to move, her hands tracing the cold metallic surface of the wall, navigating through the ruined escape pod bay. She found a maintenance panel, its cover ripped off, wires dangling like exposed nerves. With trembling fingers, she tried to reconnect the emergency lighting, hoping to pierce the oppressive darkness. A spark, then another, and finally, a faint flickering glow illuminated the bay. The light revealed the true horror of the scene. The mangled escape pods, the twisted metal, the empty gaping holes where the hatches had been. And most disturbingly, a faint shimmering residue on the floor, like a dark, oily stain, where the crew members had vanished. Rostova's stomach churned. This wasn't just a predator. It was a devourer, a cosmic vacuum that consumed everything in its path. And it left behind nothing. She stumbled out of the escape pod bay, her mind racing. She needed to find a weapon, something, anything. The ship's armory was in Sector 2, a long, treacherous journey through the darkened corridors. She moved like a ghost, her footsteps muffled by the thick, sound-dampening flooring. The groaning pulse, though diminished, still echoed through the ship, a constant reminder of the unseen threat. She kept her hand on the wall, using it as a guide, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. As she moved through the ship, she noticed a subtle change. The darkness wasn't uniform. It shifted, pulsed, like a living thing. She could feel its presence, a cold, empty void that moved with her, shadowing her every step. Suddenly, a section of the corridor wall shimmered, the metal rippling like water. A dark tendril, a wisp of shadow extended from the wall, reaching for her. She recoiled, her heart leaping into her throat. The tendril retracted, then lunged again, faster this time. Rostova ducked, the tendril brushing against her arm, leaving a trail of icy coldness. She scrambled back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The wall shimmered again, and more tendrils emerged, writhing like serpents. They were faster now, more aggressive, as if the thing was growing impatient. Rostova knew she couldn't outrun it. She needed to find a way to fight back. She remembered the ship's research lab, located near the armory. It contained experimental energy weapons designed for studying exotic alien life forms. She changed direction, heading towards the lab, the tendrils snapping at her heels. She reached a junction, the corridor splitting into two. The tendrils hesitated as if unsure which way to go. Rostova took advantage of the moment, sprinting down the left corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She reached the lab, its door sealed shut. She frantically punched in the access code, her fingers trembling. The door hissed open and she stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind her. She leaned against the door, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the darkened lab. The lab was a mess, equipment scattered, consoles smashed. But in the corner, she saw it. A prototype energy pistol, its blue glow casting a faint light in the darkness. She grabbed the pistol, her fingers wrapping around its cold, metallic grip. She activated it, the blue glow intensifying, illuminating the lab. The door shimmered, and the tendrils began to push through the gap, writhing and snapping. Rostova aimed the pistol, her hand shaking, and fired. A beam of blue energy erupted from the pistol, striking the tendrils. They recoiled, hissing, then retreated back into the wall. Rostova fired again, and again, the energy beams tearing through the darkness. The tendrils retreated further, their shimmering forms flickering and fading. She felt a surge of hope. The weapon was working. She could fight back. But then, the groaning pulse intensified, reaching a deafening crescendo. The darkness in the lab began to swirl, to coalesce, forming a dark, amorphous shape. The shape grew larger, its dark tendrils extending, reaching for her. It was no longer just tendrils. It was a form, a dark, shifting mass, a void within a void. Rostova aimed the pistol, her finger trembling on the trigger. She fired, the energy beam striking the dark mass. The mass absorbed the energy, its dark form flickering, then intensifying. It was feeding on the energy, growing stronger. Rostova realized the horrifying truth. The weapon wasn't hurting it. It was feeding it. The dark mass surged forward, its tendrils reaching for her, its dark form engulfing her. She screamed, a desperate, futile cry in the face of the cosmic horror. The darkness consumed her, her screams fading into the silence. The lab, once a beacon of scientific exploration, was now just another empty space, another void within the void. The Argos 7 continued its silent drift, a testament to the unknowable horrors that lurked in the vast, empty darkness of space, a chilling reminder that some things were never meant to be found.